Welcome to episode 5 of Metal and Forge, a podcast about manhood, entrepreneurship, American life, and matters of the soul, hosted by Kent Lapp, Austin Lapp, and Patrick Miller. We're here to talk tonight about issues that matter to men. And we're interested in seeing men flourish. We're interested in seeing men become the kind of men that they were created to be. That's who we want to be. That's the kind of stuff that we talk about when we get together. And we thought we might as well record these conversations and put them out there for the world to see. I'm always interested in talking to you fine gentlemen because I always learn a lot from you. And tonight, I want to tee up a topic. I know really high on your radar screen right now is the topic of the election. And if we have time, we'll get to the election. But by the time this episode makes it out into the world, the election will have already taken place in the U.S., and we may or may not know who the next president's going to be. So I guess I kind of want to just let that set, although on the eve of election day, it feels a little bit like I can't just totally let that set and move past it. But I want to talk about something a little bit deeper today. I want to talk about adventure and risk, awakening the wild masculine spirit in a modern world. So I believe that adventure is vital to masculinity. I think it's fundamental to who men are. And I think, of course, some men are much more oriented towards adventure than others. But I think you would agree that the modern world has pretty much taken a lot of the wild out of men and kind of beaten out the spirit of adventure and wildness in many young men who come up through the school system, come up through the career ladder, and end up in their midlife, perhaps bored and wondering if that's all there is to life. And then, like I did, substitute that lack of adventure in their life and that improper orientation in their life by going for cheap substitutes, things that feel like they're adventurous, things that kind of scratch that itch, but that are ultimately destructive. Things like an overemphasis on watching or being engaged with sports or gambling or adult content. Maybe it's just scrolling on your phone. Maybe it's getting away from the family for a boys' night of debauchery every once in a while. Whatever it is, there's substitutes to true adventure that a lot of men in the modern world use to try to scratch that itch. And my question for you gentlemen is, what are you doing to nurture a spirit of adventure in your own life, to scratch that itch in your own life, to keep yourself healthy and wholehearted in that way? Are you fostering a sense of adventure? Are you aware of the deep fundamental need that you have for adventure? And if so, how does that go as a father and a husband? Kent, I would like to kick it off with you and just hear your thoughts on adventure and how do you experience it?
Yeah, I'm actually excited to talk through this because I do think that it is something that is different in our time than it was for quite a lot of human history. And not necessarily in a way like, oh, we need to fix this, something really needs to be changed here. It is just different. You know, when you think about the role that men played in the time of the Native Americans and in the time of, King Saul and David. And, even before that, it was, your life was just an adventure. That's just how it was going to have to be. And now it doesn't necessarily have to be that way. My take on this a little bit out of the gate is, I think sometimes I'm trying to find ways to make my life a little bit less of an adventure because I think it's just probably because of my wiring. I don't find myself lacking for adventure too often. Maybe it's sometimes the opposite way where it's like, man, there's a little bit too much going on here. What can we trim out to make this ride a little less crazy? But there are two things that I think are related to this. It's not exactly what we're talking about, but I think it's adjacent, which is there's two things that will do something for me that nothing else will. One is riding a horse. And there's something about, I was sort of, you know, spent my teen years on the back of a horse, and it was very extremely instrumental and extremely beneficial. And, that's just going to be with me until the day that I die, because of I was 13 when I got a horse and didn't have a dad. By the way, today, November 4th, marks exactly 30 years that my dad passed away. So,
wow.
but it
I did not
also
know.
happens to be Arya's birthday, which is kind of cool, my youngest. So she turned 6
Hmm.
today. But, so I was 10 when dad died, and then mom finally let me get a horse when I was 13. You had to take care of it yourself and the whole thing, so it was like she had a term for this at the time, which was she thought it was good for boys to have a small world to have dominion over. And that's what she was
Hmm.
hoping a horse for me would become, because I had to take care of figure everything out, and then,
Yeah.
so there's just something about being on the back of a horse. It's just my favorite animal. There's just something magical about him that cleanses, purifies, rejuvenates me in a way that nothing else does. The only thing that gets close, honestly, is motorcycles. Something
Hmm.
with two wheels. It's not, maybe not quite the same, but it's in the same category. So I don't have a motorcycle now, but I did for a couple years until this spring. And when I would feel like I needed to sort of awaken the giant within, so to speak, I would just go on the motorcycle. And there was something about that sort of rejuvenated and refreshed me. That's not the adventure we're talking about, though, but it is refreshing for me, and it was adventurous, I guess. And so maybe it scratched the itch a little bit. But the adventure thing, um, I guess I just tried to answer your question, try to not allow myself to be completely separated from my internal male or masculine instincts and desires, in a way, the things that will fulfill me in a good way, because I can tell it's supposed to be fulfilling. Things like doing work that I feel internally matters, that I enjoy. Um, the right amount of risk taking. That for me is certainly something. If there was no risk taking whatsoever in my work, then that's probably not going to be the best long term fit for me. Um, and
Hmm.
then and then beyond that, I want to feel good. I want to feel healthy. I want my mind to be clear, so that's why I go to the gym. Uh, that's why I do sauna. You know, that's why I care about what I eat, because those things do have an effect for me. And
Hmm.
I tying into the adventure thing, or maybe the masculine spirit thing a little bit. I guess in general, I want to feel good about myself. I want to respect myself. And if I were to allow myself to become too separated from these fundamental things that have shaped the masculine for millennia, play out differently in different times. But if I were to allow myself to be completely separated from all that, I would not respect myself. I would not feel good about myself. And then the other thing is, I want to feel good. I want to look people in the eye when I'm walking down the street. You know, I
Hmm.
want to hold my chin up, but not necessarily have your nose in the air. I think your
Yeah.
nose in the air to me means you're self-consumed and arrogant and proud, and need to be adjusted. But I think it's good to go through life with your chin held up. So
Hmm.
those are a couple initial thoughts.
Do you see the same problem that I'm highlighting here, where maybe not necessarily the audience of this podcast, but that my perception is that many men in America go through life, especially as they get through their 30s and into their 40s, at the risk of being asleep at the wheel, at the risk of falling asleep to the rhythms of a somewhat soft modern life that, protects us from, the hardship and vicissitudes that our forefathers faced. You mentioned, of course, that just staying alive 100 years ago was a certain adventure. And we've kind of beaten back, absolute privation to the point where instead of leaving the cave and having to go kill something and drag it home, we just spend 8.5 hours under fluorescent lighting and a drop ceiling in a cubicle, and then we go home and we watch someone else have some adventure on television, and we have our processed food that was put there by some people in a faraway factory, and then we medicate ourselves with some kind of substance that someone made in some other faraway factory, and then we go to sleep and we wake up and do it all the next day again, and our life just kind of passes in somewhat of a fog. And the best thing that we have in our whole life is maybe a week-long vacation to some fairly well-groomed American-style resort, on some island somewhere. You never really get out to see the real locals and really face any real uncertainty or any real risk. It's just very hyper safe, hyper groomed. All the wildness, all the unpredictability has been engineered out, I think, by design in a lot of ways. And I don't want to be, glib about what a blessing it is to not have to fight for your survival every day. I'm not trying to go back to, some long ago world where we have to beat privation back hour by hour. That's not what I'm talking about. But I do sense this kind of risk of men being lulled to sleep by the hyper safe, over engineered spaces that we have in our culture today. I mean, is this problem something that are you seeing it too?
Yes, absolutely. And I'm curious, to get Austin's thoughts on your original question there. So I don't want to take up too much airtime here, but yeah, absolutely. I think I probably see everything that you're seeing. And I would go a step further that I think there is one way to look at what is happening in the modern American life and say, truthfully, to some capacity, we are being harvested. We are the crop and we are being harvested. We're being harvested by big pharma. We're being harvested by big data. We're being harvested by big food. We're being harvested by the government in a way. They tax you as much as they possibly can. And, you're only... Well, you get harvested then at the end also, quite literally sometimes when you die. But, we can contribute quite a lot. Sick people can contribute quite a lot to the powers that be. But when you're dead, it's over. You can what's the saying? You can shear a sheep forever, but you can only skin it once. And I think they figured it out. So like, where's the edge that they can bring us to and then make money off of us for as long as possible? And that's a cynical way to look at it. I understand that, because the other way you could look at it is, well, the food people are actually trying to serve you by providing food. The pharma people are actually trying to help you by providing, pharmaceuticals, etc. I think both are true. I think both are kind of true at once. But I do think we are being harvested in a way that we're not cognizant of on a day-to-day. And I think that includes men. I also think that there is either an accidental sort of campaign or a on-purpose campaign to change the spirit of the man over time, it seems like. And I can see the reasoning for it. We're dangerous. We're supposed to be dangerous. That's kind of what we're talking about here. Mm-hmm. How do you retain your danger in the modern American life?
That's right. Austin, what do you think of in this whole risk and adventure category?
Right. It's interesting. Kent's talking about horses, and I grew up with the same thing, but much different experience. I think I had a bad horse for one. She was a grouch, and she just wasn't pleasant to ride. And, but yeah, there is definitely like that part of me that comes alive, particularly outdoors. I've recently taken up hunting again and just find myself spending more and more money in that area. And I'm asking myself why, it's like, well, is it because, I just, I want to hang a head on my wall that I shot, or like, is it because I like being in nature? I think it's all of it. I think it's like I was out hunting this past Saturday and big buck comes in and I'm like fumbling around and did everything wrong, missed it, sliced my finger in the process, and I'm like kind of mad and looking for counseling services for when you miss a big buck. There's nothing out there, by the way. That'd be a good ministry. And I'm like, why am I doing this? Like 5 years ago, 6 years ago, I don't know, I just had no interest in it, and I'm like kind of so I think this is a timely podcast because it's been something that's been in my brain. I think it's just because of I need something to conquer. I need something to kill. I need something I love, field to table, all the things Kent's talking about, like health and food, and knowing this came from my backfield and I put a food plot in and it ate my food plot. And I've grown this thing and I've harvested it, and I like skinning it myself and butchering it myself. There's something very primal about it, about, butchering your own deer. I'm done taking it to the butcher. My brother Jesse and I have kind of like honed it in on how to do this. And I'm like, why am I doing this? Like the cost per pound that I pay for venison is astronomical when you factor in my time, what I'm worth. And, just buying a pair of binoculars is $250, just like that, just so you can see the deer when they're further away. And it's just, funny thinking about these things because I'm like, why am I doing this? And I think it's because it's the thrill of it. I need something to conquer, to kill. And, it used to be hiking. It still is to a certain extent. We live in a beautiful area. We have these gullies, these tributaries that run down into the lakes. And they're kind of, no man's land. I mean, it's private property. It's uncharted territory. Years ago, some college kids went down close to where Kent used to live, and they went down in this big gully, and they ended up slipping, falling, hurting themselves, and it's just. But I think it's that whole, that thrill, that adrenaline rush, from hiking a gully that you've never been up. That's not a beaten path. It's not stairs you go up. It's your scaling waterfalls and cliffs and things like that. And there's something also about nature. There's a part of my heart that craves beauty, and nature and water has a way of doing that like nothing else does. And so those are kind of my raw thoughts on it, just kind of spitballing where I'm at in life right now.
Can I say something here? Because I think this is one very tactical insight we can make here. Austin, the way you're describing hunting, and then the way you sort of say, like, I don't know, is it really needed? Should I really be doing this? Should I really be spending that much money on it? This is, I think, a way that guys can help each other, because what I would say to you is, if you're not putting your work at risk, it's going to take time, right? It takes a lot of time. If you do it right, it takes time. And yeah, you could always be spending that at the office, but if you're not putting your work at risk and you have the money for it, then do it. Don't think you need some profound reason to do it. Do it if you want to do it. Do it if it makes you happy. Because I actually think that the time out of the office that you spend on something like this, if it is something you want to do, and if it does make you happy and you do get an adventure out of it, then you probably would not be any further ahead by trading that for just more time at the office. Actually, I think you might be further ahead by taking the time and hunting.
Right.
So do it. Don't feel like you have to justify it, because you're already justifying it by what you're getting out of it. So if you're enjoying it, stick with it. Spend more money on it. Spend more time on it. Keep, hunting the things that you want to hunt and go for it. But let me ask this, though, because you kind of mentioned something too that I have experienced, which is using the hunting as a example here. I hunted into my low 20s, maybe late teens, 20ish, and then quit for like 10 years and didn't want to. Didn't really have a desire. But low 30s, it was weird. I started to have a desire for some of this stuff again. I was starting to think about horses more. I missed hunting more. Could I take my boys out with me on some of this? It took like a decade or a decade and a half for that stuff to kind of come back around. And I wonder if I wonder if other people have experienced that too.
It's where I'm at. I mean, I'm 36 years old, and I did the same thing. Hunted until I was, I don't know, 18, 19, 20, and then just wasn't worth it, didn't want to put the time in, kind of mailed it in slowly over time. And then, I guess my war to fight back then was business and that was really fun, building an empire, so to speak. I mean, not literally, but building something, the challenge of it, tackling it, that was all my energy. And that was probably over 10 years ago now that I started, really where I tackled the career I'm in. And I'm not bored in that per se, but it's interesting how the things that brought you life when you were a kid come back around again. And that's an interesting thing, because you're saying that about horses, I'm saying that about hunting. And I wonder what that is.
Well, if you think about it, in your 20s, a lot of times too,
back.
you might be in a new career or a new business venture. You're probably trying to find a girl. You might be getting married. You might be starting to have kids. It's just all this new stuff. And maybe it makes sense because you have so much adventure in that season of life, and then things get a little bit more established. And, as things get more established, just by nature of it, there's going to be less risk, less unknowns, a little bit less adventure maybe in some way. And so then some of the stuff maybe comes back around more.
Mm-hmm. That's what I was thinking too, is that it kind of maps onto the cycle of our life, as we kind of start to corral some of the bigger unknowns in our life, get into our 40s, maybe late 30s, the career is a bit more on track, things are headed towards a more predictable direction, and then all of a sudden we have this need for something. Because I was thinking about, well, what makes something really adventurous? What is it that scratches that itch? And part of it is, one of the things that I think is important is the unpredictability of it. I think if you truly know what's going to happen, it's hard for it to be adventurous. So in our modern life, we go out of our way to remove unpredictability from almost everything. The technology and information revolutions have just given us a ton of information, a ton of power, a ton of technological prowess, and we really can avoid moments of uncertainty to a much greater degree than we used to. We can just know more, and we're just less uncertain. When I think about things that have really scratched that itch in terms of adventure and risk, my mind goes back to last summer when I went on a raft trip with a couple of guys. I took my two sons with me, and we floated down the James River for a couple days in Virginia. And the second day, the river had come up a good bit, and it was flowing, much higher and much faster. And it was deep enough that we weren't able to use our raft poles to push off at the bottom. So it was harder to guide the raft. We were just kind of at the mercy of the current. And as we approached the pullout, where we had to, the end of our journey, and we had to make this boat ramp, or else we were going to keep floating down the river. We had to get across this fairly wide river, and the current had us shooting, to the one side of the river, and the boat ramp was on the other side of the river. So we had to kind of triangulate, figure out when we had to have the raft all the way to the left so we could hit that boat ramp. And there's really no way to guide it other than, jump off the raft and swim alongside of it and push it. So we ended up doing that 2 or 3 times as we approached this boat ramp. The river was moving fast, and it kept kicking us off to the right, and we'd jump off into the river and we'd push, in a concerted effort, a dozen guys pushing against the side of this raft, in a coordinated kind of Navy SEAL style, we'd 3, 2, 1, push, and we'd kick off and we'd swim, and there's just this churn of bodies, and we were trying to get this raft across the river, and we were failing. We just couldn't quite get it across. And we knew if we missed the ramp, we were up the creek without a paddle, literally, except we were down the creek, but we had no paddle. And I just remember that the risk of swimming in that we were exhausted, for one, because we had to explosively kick several, for extended period of time as we were trying to navigate this raft. There was a bunch of guys in tight quarters. The river was high and fast, and we were all thrashing and churning. And it was a very real possibility that somebody ends up under the raft. Somebody, gets lost in the churn. Somebody, maybe we missed the takeout. There was a lot of uncertainty. There was some actual physical risk. There was certainly physical demands. We were moving as fast as we could and at the level of fitness that we had. We were gasping for air. It was ragged breaths of like, we've got to get this freaking raft across the river. And it was a concerted effort, and we did it. We got it done. But pulling together in a way that risked our actual life, and in a way that had some downside risk if we missed our objective, and just the uncertainty of it. It was one of those moments of adventure that my boys will never forget, right? Sharing that adventure with my boys was something that we'll always talk about. That raft trip stands out in our minds as being one of the highlights of our times together. And so thinking about, well, what makes an adventure? And two things are, you have to have real risk of loss. If something goes sideways, you lose something valuable, up to and including your life. So I think, there's micro adventures and macro adventures. And I think as men, we need both. I think in order to enjoy the micro adventures, and I will describe those as the adventures of everyday life, because I think we can learn to see the beauty of our everyday life and our relationship with our spouse and our kids as full of adventure in and of themselves. I think there's an adventure in the journey of an ascendant consciousness. I think as you try to ascend as a human being and try to grow and change, I think there's a certain adventure in that, in just the experience of, wow, what is it that, is unfolding in my life, and being present for that. I think we can learn to see the adventure in that. But in order to really wake up to that, we have to foster some real macro adventure in our life as well. And those kind of adventures are where there's real risk. There's real risk of loss, maybe business risk, financial risk, certainly risk to, body, and risk to our future. Thinking about things like difficult sporting challenges, difficult physical challenges, maybe just traveling somewhere without a plan, right? Going and discovering uncharted territory, as you mentioned earlier. Those, I think you have to nurture a certain amount of macro, big adventures where there's real risk in order to be awake and alive to the kind of micro adventures in your life that really keep feeding that part of your masculine soul. Does that kind of resonate with you?
Yeah, it does. I mean, another way to say it back to you in some way is you got to be alive to experience the adventure of the day to day. And by alive, I don't mean like physically alive. Of course you're alive, but I just mean your spirit has to be awakened to pick up on, appreciate, enjoy the many adventures of every day. And if your spirit is not awakened, then you are not going to pick up on those little things, But I do think, though, in terms of maybe more the macro of what you're talking about, Patrick, some of the life-threatening stuff, maybe even, I do think that part I do think is different for different guys, because I do feel like, for me personally, I will probably never jump out of an airplane. I will probably never bungee jump. I will probably never try to ride a wheelie at 100 miles an hour. I just have no desire, no taste for that.
You are different than your brother, man.
He'll bungee jump. He'll jump out of an airplane.
He did all
Yeah,
those things.
he's done all those things and probably would do it again. I have no taste for it. So I love adventure and I love to have fun, but I don't want to be doing things that could result in death. That does nothing for me. But I do think that maybe it does for some guys.
I think everybody's line is at a different place in terms of, what's the appropriate level of physical risk to take in order for the payoff of whatever reward I'm getting. Certainly you ride motorcycles, which is beyond some people's line of, risk. Some people would say that's too risky for what I get from it, but it's not for you. For some people, it may be jumping out of an airplane. For some people, it might be, free soloing El Capitan. But there's kind of a continuum there in terms of how much physical risk am I willing to take. I think about it here on the farm sometimes of, I do take real physical risks sometimes just in the adventure of taming this property. There's certain trees that I cut down. It's like, well, I could get killed doing this. Climbing a ladder and, being 25 feet in the air, trying to, do something with one hand, hold on with the other, nearing 50 years old, there's a certain amount of risk. And I think, I'm probably too old for this shit. But, there's still a certain sense of being alive that comes from, well, taking your life in your own hands and being responsible for the outcome of it, depending on your own skill, your own chutzpah to get done whatever needs to get done, and taking some risk and being courageous to do it if that's the right thing for you. And everybody's line is at a different place. I'm just pointing out that there is a need like that in all of us to a certain extent.
Agreed. And I'm thinking of this whole thing of, we call it hobbies, and there's like, how many different hobbies are out there, and why do we have hobbies? I'm as you guys are talking, I'm thinking about, okay, so in the last, I don't know, ever since I bought this property, so 2019, since then things kind of started to, that's kind of when I got back into hunting again, because now I got my own land and, can harvest some game off of it. And then I got into beekeeping, again, just something, it's a thrill. I mean, to a point it is, learning how to stay calm and be one with the hive, otherwise they're going to come at you. But I've worked with clients too, and there was this one time, this guy was like, I want to say he was a 70-year-old, like in his 70s, and he had a big house with so many things in it. Like, he had scuba gear, and then he had the entire third floor of his house was a model train station, or a model, I mean, thousands, I would think 10, 20, 30 grand worth of, trains, and I don't even know what those things cost, but I'm guessing. And then music, like he had a music store. And so I think we were talking about it, and this is a man in his, 70s, and he's like, I realized at some point in time in my life, every hobby I have lasts about 10 years, and then I move on to something else, but I still have all the residue or all the elements of that hobby that I keep with me for some reason. So I get to the end of my life or towards the end of my life, and that's why I have all this stuff. It's because of hobbies, and it all had to be related back to what you're saying, Patrick, is some kind of sense of adventure and, creativity, like the arts, with music and the trains and that kind of a thing. Very, very unique individual. Really, it was a pleasure working with him. But that has always made me think of like this whole thing of hobbies and how it ties into, it's more than just a hobby. It's actually a need that we have to a necessary outlet, a healthy outlet into this sense of adventure and whatever you call it. Otherwise, it does go the unhealthy route.
I think we need
I'm glad.
I think we need a new word for hobby, because the first thing that pops into my mind when someone, it doesn't happen that often, but every now and then someone be like, what are your hobbies? Literally the first and basically only thing that comes to my mind is like, what the fuck? Like, hobby? What's a hobby? Like, I guess I don't have any hobbies, but if you ask me, well, what do you enjoy? You know, I could list off a few things. I just don't know what hobby means. You know what I mean? And it sounds like such a dumb word. And it also sounds like so frivolous. Like, what do you do because you don't have anything else that you could be doing or want to do? So what do you do that you enjoy is what it kind of comes across to me. I don't know. I don't like the word. Maybe partly because every time someone has asked me what my hobbies are in the last 20 years, I have no idea, you know, but there are things that I do that I enjoy, which is the same thing. So, you know, I'm splitting hairs on that point, but.
Well, that's fascinating.
Sorry, I got the definition here. I just pulled it up. An activity done regularly in one's leisure time for pleasure.
Yeah, see, leisure time. What the fuck? Like,
Yeah,
that doesn't make any
what
sense.
Is this leisure time?
What
you
is, yeah,
speak of?
you either you carve out time for something that you enjoy doing, or you don't.
I
You
make time for
for
these,
it. You know what I
yeah.
mean? Like, what is leisure time? Although, speaking of education, we talked about that a few episodes ago. The owner of our gym said he took a college class that he paid $3,500 for that was called The Art of Leisure. So he should know something about how to handle, you know, leisure time, because he literally took a college class on it that he said was absolutely a waste of time and money. But
that sounds like some kind of late stage capitalism.
yeah,
stuff.
it really does. But no, I do think, you know, we all have stuff that we enjoy doing, and I think it's important to do those things when you can.
Well,
I think
but
what you're saying is that a hobby, to me, a hobby doesn't, like, it's something a woman can do too. You know, like, we need a more masculine form of that word for me to think of it like that, because a hobby's not necessary. I think what we're talking about is necessary.
That's right. And I want to double click on this idea of things that you do for pleasure in your leisure time. Because maybe the idea of leisure time in and of itself is an idea that is kind of a remnant of the kind of late stage capitalist Western American idea that we're talking about. And maybe there's a new, better way to think about the totality of our time and how we spend it. Maybe it's not to divide it up into what productive time and leisure time and, you know, I don't know what other categories you would have, but I guess if you zoom out all the way, it's like it's your life, right? And it's hopefully it's oriented towards a goal that is, you know, sufficiently cohesive and motivating for you to kind of recruit the more wild parts of yourself into some general direction and heading into it. And there's going to be aspects of that that are productive, aspects of that that are restful. And then there's this other category, which is, you know, kind of creation or adventure for the sake of it in and of itself. It's not necessarily to produce profit or not necessarily to produce an outcome. Maybe it's just to produce beauty. Maybe it's just to produce an experience. And I think I think maybe one of the consequences, I'm just riffing here, but I haven't really tested this idea, but I wonder if one of the consequences of capitalism is this idea that every slice of time, no matter how fine, has a certain dollar value to it. And so there's slices of time in which I'm generating dollars, and there's these slices of time that are hypothetically leisure time that I then get to have quote unquote hobbies, and then I fill that. That's not really how I think about life. I'm just trying to think about what the language is that I would use as an alternative for that. But I think the way, at first glance, that doesn't seem like a wholehearted and integrated life, is to split it up into those different categories. Am I onto something there?
I think you're absolutely onto something there. I think that's actually what we're talking about here, you know, because, and I can give you an example, because I do think that's, and that comes back to the original question. That's how I tend to think about these things in general, is like, what sort of a life am I living? What sort of a life am I tracking towards, at least, you know? And am I happy with that? Or is there other things? Because even this podcast is, you could call it an adventure. That's part of the reason why I wanted to do it. It's sort of an adventure. You could also, I guess, you could call it a hobby. You could also, I guess, call it something at least I'm doing for fun. You could kind of call all of those things, but the one thing that I like to incorporate enough into my life is things that make me pay attention, prepare for, maybe be nervous about, where you feel like you have some skin in the game and your senses are like sharpened, And for me, I sort of, on the nervous thing, I try to find a balance there, because what I found is, like, if I were to have to give a speech 2 weeks from now to a large crowd, it would, unless that's going to pay me a shit ton of money, which no one's going to do that. And even then, I'm not sure if it's worth it, because it's going to be in my head. The investment return on that, the return is not, for me, worth the investment, because of how much I'm going to think about it, of how much I'm going to be preparing for it, of the amount of mental space that's going to be taken in my mind leading up to that. Other people could do that same thing and not have it take up so much of their mind. So that's too much for me to have, say, that's just an example. But that's not, I'm not really interested in that. But, do I want to dabble maybe sometime in stand-up comedy? It scares the shit out of me. But it sounds like it could be kind of fun, and it would be scary, and it would make me nervous, and it would make me prepare, and there would be a risk, those types of things. I just sort of like try to find, if I notice something is taking up too much bandwidth in my mind, it's making me too nervous, I'm thinking about it too much, it's making me not be able to perform quite as well, let's say the main thing that's making me money, then I'm going to want to trim that back or cut that out. But if I don't have enough of it, I don't have enough of that type of thing, then I want to add some of that back in, because it keeps me awake. It keeps me paying attention.
Yeah. That kind of points to another one of these markers for what is necessary for there to be true adventure. And that is the idea of flow, or being in the zone, or in flow state. Being in flow is when you're directing all of your attention towards the task that you're engaged in, but you do not experience a lot of thoughts about yourself or your progress or your performance. You're just in the flow of what you're doing. Time disappears as a construct. You're just all into this adventure. And it sounds like for you, Kent, the idea, for example, of speaking to a large crowd 2 weeks in the future would be the kind of thing that you wouldn't experience a lot of flow, because you'd actually experience some self-consciousness leading up to that. And maybe even while you're doing it, you'd be self-conscious of your own performance up there, which takes you out of flow, which would say, well, this isn't really a good adventure in that way, because I'm not experiencing any flow. If you jump out of an airplane or you scale El Cap free solo, you're in flow state. You're just totally in the zone. That's all your time disappears. You're not self-conscious or anything. And if you get if you jump out of that state, now you've got a problem, especially if you're hanging onto the wall at El Cap. But I will say, Alex Honnold's comments about adventure and taking risks, taking physical risks, are part of what has me thinking about this. Alex Honnold being the guy that free soloed El Capitan, and he's the subject of that excellent documentary on Netflix if you haven't seen it. But flow state, the having that flow state come over you is one of the markers for adventure. I think the true unpredictability of it and the real risk of it, risk of something, I think those are three. That kind of completes the trifecta of things that I look for in terms of saying, hey, we're actually having an adventure here. We don't know what's going to happen. I'm totally engrossed in this, and there's a real risk that I might, if things go sideways, we're going to lose something: time, money, a limb, maybe my life, whatever. But those are all three critical markers for true adventure to happen.
Can we? I just want to go back to this thought about the adventure sort of being a holistic part of your overall life, because it is a spectrum. I think we had mentioned this earlier. There's a little bit of there's different strokes for different folks, right? And I would say it's hard to put an exact percentage on it, but just from anecdotally, from my vantage point, from what I've seen, I might say about half, 50% of working males in this country, if I had to go live their life, I would probably rather shoot myself. It just wouldn't, you know, the daily habits, the amount of risk that's incorporated, the mindset, the worldview, the goals, where the time is spent, where the excitement comes from. And I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm just saying for me, that's probably about 50%. And, you know, the most extreme example you can kind of give is, at least for me, is when I go into a place like the DMV, dude, I just want to get out of there as fast as I possibly can, because, and I don't necessarily say this as a knock on individuals who are there, because when you go into a system like that, you are going to succumb to the system. I have not, and I don't know that I've seen an exception to that. I'm not saying there's not exceptional people at the DMV. I'm just saying that system tends to grind people into a certain mold. And when you sort of see how they arrive at work, how they spend their time at work, the little joys or pleasures they get throughout their day at work, a lot of times there's sugar involved, maybe a lunch break for sure, or a smoke break, the way that the interactions are had with each other. There's just a very strong culture there. And I would rather, it it would feel like death to me to go in an environment like that for more than a week or two. And so I would say for about 50%, it would just feel like death to me. And I'm not even talking anymore about 50% of the people at DMV. I'm saying 50% of people that get a W-2 paycheck, that would feel like death to me. And then there's so many people that would look at the life that I'm living and think, gee whiz, this guy's not having any fun. Like, good grief. He's not hunting. He's not, you know what I mean? Like, you could go on down the list. He's not traveling that much. He's not, none of this stuff. So it is sort of a spectrum. So it's not like we can completely change where we're at overnight, but we can acknowledge if something's not working for us, we can at least start to make incremental change in a direction that we're more excited about.
100%.
I really like, there's this company called Buffalo Jackson, and they produce really like quality manly coats and bags, and I love their tagline. It's honor your wild.
That's good.
And I'm just like, man, I could steal that. Like, I'll support the company just because of that. And their whole branding just sucks me in on a deeper, rugged, beard growing, flannel wearing, cowboy boots kind of a level. Like, they're literally sucking me in by the heart because of their tagline. And it's amazing to me. It like blows my mind that I like their products that much. But
well, that's kind of what we're talking about, branding. Right? That's kind of what we're saying is we all need to honor our wild as dudes. Mm-hmm. And if we were women, we could talk about what we need to do as women, but we're not. So, and this is just something with the dudes. But the saddest thing that I see, and you mentioned this earlier, Patrick, is when someone somewhere in their probably 20s or 30s, I think a lot of times something happens or enough of things happen, or for some reason that wild gets covered up, and then by the time they're in their 40s, it's all but concreted under, you know, and then the rest of their life is lived without any sort of acknowledgement of that.
100%. And that wild can get clipped out of a man in a couple different ways. It's not just the good guy, the well-behaved guy that gets the wild clipped out of him too. It's also the guy that goes after the cheap alternatives and chases after these kind of sugar highs, if you will, of false adventure, and then ends up, late midlife, alone with a less than stellar career, and failed relationships and resentment about the time that he's wasted and kind of a lackadaisical outlook on the next, the final quarter of his life, let's say. So it's not just the good guy that lives this kind of too good lockdown kind of life. It's also the guy that thinks he's getting the adventure, but it's some substitute adventure found in, a strip club or a line of cocaine or, a 12-pack a day type of deal. I'm curious. There's this idea that, the adventure of your life, when I think about Abraham back in Genesis, he was 70-ish when God called him out of his father's tent and into the adventure of his life. And that was, 20 to 30 years later is when he finally had his son that God had promised him. But the idea of journeying from some current reality that is insufficient in some way, it's not satisfying for you, where if you wake up to the fact that your life isn't what you hoped it would be at this stage, and I think there's a lot of men in midlife do that. So, like you said, something happens. Maybe it's a divorce, a job change, something shifts, something interrupts the patterns and wakes them up to the fact that, hey, things are not the way that I want them to be. And here I am, 40 or 45 or 50 or whatever, and my life is not pointed in the direction that I wanted it to go. It's not how I hoped I would end up, But then going from that place of it's undesirable where I am, moving into some hypothetically better future, there's a tremendous amount of adventure in that, in capturing a vision for what that could look like, and then going on the adventure of this, developing the skills, the mindset, and the habits that you need to embody this new future reality that you want to be you. I mean, that's a hell of an adventure to experience the changes in consciousness that come from surrendering to that, from submitting to that, from getting the dead wood in your life burned out and exposing, all of that dead wood to the fire of truth and reality, and letting yourself, experience the pain of having all that stripped away and then becoming someone. That's adventurous. And I think one of the reasons, when you're talking to somebody, when you're talking to another dude, when you pull up to him and, somebody you've never met and you start talking to them, you can tell if they've gone to the edge or not. You can tell if you're dealing with somebody who has walked right up to the abyss and stared into it. And people who have are just more interesting. They're more engaging. They're more alive. There's more to them. It's the kind of people we want to surround ourselves with. And there's something about having the courage to walk up to the edge of the abyss and gaze into it, and allow yourself to be changed by that, by what you see. It builds something in you, and it makes you more useful. It makes you better adapted to your life, and it makes you a stronger man. And then the next adventure you go on, you're wiser for it, and there's more to you to engage with the challenges that you're going to run into. And it's exactly the kind of people we want to be. So I think we have to always, drawing it back to the micro and the macro, we have to have rhythms of adventure that lead us into the bigger adventures of our life, starting businesses, taking challenges, creating something beautiful, whether that's a piece of art or a relationship or anything, create a song, whatever it is, creating something beautiful, taking the risk to create something beautiful and putting it out there, honing your skills to develop that, and getting good at it, getting good at delivering it. That in and of itself is an adventure. And I think it wakes us up to the fact that, the journey with our wife of 25 years, there's an adventure in that too, because as I get more vulnerable, as I get more honest and truthful, there's a spark that happens in our relationship that starts to burn away some of that dead wood, and that creates this opportunity for new intimacy, and there's real adventure in intimacy. I mean, if you want to see what might happen when two people bind themselves together and don't let go for life, that's a hell of an adventure too. I think there's there's a continuum of adventures that we need to foster as men in order to stay healthy and alive. And so as a man, as a dad and a husband in particular, it's easy to make the argument that, you should maybe sacrifice certain amounts of adventures with the boys, let's say. I'm thinking of, an annual or quarterly motorcycle trip with the boys, let's say. Maybe some of that has to be sacrificed for seasons in our life, but I think we risk too much if we just cut it out entirely. How do you balance that as a dad and a husband? What's the right way to think about all that?
Well, the first thing that I wanted to mention, because I think it's super important, Patrick, that you touched on, was this idea that you could think of it, I guess, as almost meaningless or hollow adventure and meaningful or substantial adventure. And I think the couple of examples you had given was like, super consumed with sports, or maybe super consumed with sports betting, or maybe even adult content. The adult content is probably the best example. And I don't do any sports betting. I know a lot of people do, and it's probably totally fine, right, for a lot of them. But I think of it the same as, if you tell me that you drink a few sodas per day and that you eat a fair amount of sugary content, I know for a fact that you're going to eat less calories, less nutrient dense calories. Why do I know that for a fact? Well, because if you're drinking several sodas a day and you're eating plenty of food with sugar in it, and you're eating plenty of high processed food, you're not going to be hungry enough to drink the same or eat the same amount, intake the same amount of nutrient dense calories that you can get from, meat, for example, meat and water and vegetables and fruit. It's just, if you have too much of the one, you're not going to have enough of the other. That's just the way it is. I don't think I've met anyone who eats the right amount of nutrient dense calories and then also on top of that all adds a bunch of sugary nonsense. It's usually one at the detriment of the other, and everyone knows which one is better. And I think the same thing can actually happen in our lives as it relates to adventure. If you are living a life that is void of adventure, or you feel like you're not on the right track, your life as a whole isn't what you are hoping for, then you tend to go look for the cheap thrills and the hollow calories, so to speak. And that's unfortunate, and it's kind of a waste. And then you start to bring those into your life, and then now you're kind of hooked there, because now you don't really have time or, frankly, the desire to find more meaningful adventures. So I just think that is something that I wanted to highlight that you had touched on. You may have muted yourself, Miller. Or maybe your mic just shut off. There he is. He's back.
I had muted myself.
Yeah.
Wanted to
There we go.
hide the cough. So, as men of faith, I was thinking about how adventure and faith are connected, and it kind of goes back to the story of Abraham and the story of following God. Stepping out in faith was one of the primary adventures of his life. He tested his mettle against these adventures. He struck out and followed the call. And I'm interested in how do we break out of the kind of asleep at the wheel life of 9-to-5 job, church, family, all the regular obligations, but we're asleep at the wheel. How do we break out of that and actually, in our culture, awaken a sense of adventure among godly men, among kingdom men who are willing to take real risks to see the kingdom of heaven advance? Because let's not forget that the call on our life, the whole project that Jesus kicked off when he came to earth and lived and died and was resurrected, that whole project is this grand restoration of Eden, of restoring things back to God's glory, restoring them into right relationship with each other and with God. And, that's a very difficult challenge and an adventure, if you want to view it that way. And your imagination as a redeemed son of God is what God wants to do in the world. Someone told me that a redeemed imagination is as close as you'll get to the kingdom of heaven vision on earth. And I love that. So I guess what I'm asking is, what are the things in your imagination as a redeemed son of God that you could bring forward into the world, but that would take great risk and adventure, that would be a part of this grand restoration of Eden, this grand reuniting project of man and God being one again, being in union in Christ? Are there things that God is calling you to that perhaps are just this kind of glimmer out there that seem almost impossible, but wow, wouldn't that be something if that came forward if we realize that as a vision? Austin, you seem to be a little more bent towards maybe some of the more mystical sides of Christian faith and all of that. I'm curious, do you see adventure in your faith in that way? Does it sync up for you in that way? And do you have this glimmer of what it could be if you went on this massive adventure that God might call you to? Have you ever considered that?
Yeah. My faith needs to be practical. I really don't like theory. That doesn't have day to day, things that I can apply. Like, Jesus is very relevant. He wouldn't have made the Bible just for a nice book for us to read. It has to be practical. So this whole thing of, getting to know him in a deeper way started for me, 16 years ago now. Just a powerful experience I had with him, just realizing that he's real and actually feeling his love in ways I never had before just kind of made me realize that, he actually does have like a plan for me. And I feel like I'm still living on the fumes of, just that season of life. Is that, that's why I like business so much, because it's forced me into a spot where, I could pretend to do it without him, but I just blame him for every good thing. The world blames him for all the bad things, and I'm like, let's do the opposite. We're kind of an upside down kingdom. Let's blame him for the good things.
Amen.
Whether it was my own smarts or not, I don't know, but he made me, so I'm just gonna blame him for the good ideas I've had. So yeah, this whole thing of adventure, it took on a whole new meaning for me when I read the book Fathered by God, which is by John Eldridge, and he kind of outlines just, and put a plug in for that book, outlines different phases of manhood that we go through, and sometimes we get robbed of different phases in our childhood or growing up years, and how we can get healing from that. So if you really want to do a deep dive on that, anyone who's listening to this, go get that book. I read it and I wept. I just cried. I just realized that I didn't really know what it was to be a son, and I had to ask Jesus to help me. And it was just, incredible journey, and I blame him for where I'm at today.
I love it. That's a beautiful reflection. And, what you're talking about really is the practical steps of human transformation, learning to walk in the rhythms of Jesus. And, if it is more adventure in your life, walking with Jesus in an authentic way will certainly lead you into deeper waters in that sense, because he's always calling you, into the deeper waters. You think about the adventure of Peter climbing out of the boat and, taking a couple steps on the water. Like, that is an adventure. That's the kind of adventure that just I can't wrap my brain around. But thinking about the journey of human transformation, which I think is one of the core themes here on Metal and Forge, what does it take to transform and grow as men? What does it take to become more of the kind of men that God created us to be? One of the things that it takes is people around us to mentor us in this journey. And, kind of segueing away from the conversation just about adventure and just broadening it to human transformation in general. Kent, I know you've engaged with coaching in the past, mentors and coaching and people who can help you along your journey of transformation and growth. Talk to us a little bit about that, and I'd like to have a deeper discussion about just coaching in general. And I'm curious, I'll let you just set this up a bit and tell us what your experiences have been and what you think is important in this dynamic, and then lead this part of the conversation about coaching for us, if you would.
And before we get there, although as it turns out it's sort of related, the one point that I wanted to make with what we were saying there at the tail end was one of the things that's super helpful for me is examples. I get a lot of inspiration from other people, a lot. Honestly, most. Sometimes I wonder if I have ever had an original thought, like, and maybe I get that more than some people. I don't really know. I just know that whether it's people I know, which is a lot, or it's people I don't know, which is also a lot, you can sort of see the way they're living their life publicly, although you've never met them, but plenty of people that you do know. And I think this is the most powerful when someone is in your social circle, you know them to some capacity. Seeing people do things that it's pushing them, they're taking a risk. Just seeing people do things gives you more confidence in you doing more things yourself. So I just get a lot of inspiration from other people. So having examples to follow, learn from. And the great thing about this is you can pick and choose, dude. Like right now there's like half a dozen guys in my mind, and I can tell you, like, here's the couple things I want to pick from these two guys over here. Not a lot of the other stuff. Here's the things I want to pick from these guys. You can just take what works for you and leave the rest. Like, how cool was that? So I just get a ton of inspiration from the examples of other people. And I know this is what everyone says, right? In 5 years, you're going to be the same person you are, except for the books you read and the people you meet, or the people around you. Essentially, people's networks it really does have a powerful effect on your life. Let's talk about coaching, and actually how I'd like to talk through this, Patrick, is really just specifically in terms of coaching for a very particular need. And I'm particularly thinking of business coaching, but I know you're coaching also, and it's not necessarily business coaching, although it could dip into that, I'm sure. But so I've actually not had a lot of experience with coaching. I have more experience with consulting, but I actually don't know that I've never had a business coach. And so, no, I actually don't think I've ever really had a coach, but I have worked with a few consultants, and kind of mixed reviews on that a little bit. But coming back to coaching in particular, I know that a number of very successful business guys have had business coaching. Some still continue to have business coaching. And so I'm just kind of curious, like, how does someone know when they need it? How do you know if you do feel like you need it or could benefit from it? How do you know, like, how far to stretch financially to make this happen? Like, none of us would probably be asking the question if it's worthwhile having a coach or not, if we just had all the time in the world and all the money in the world. Like, of course, why not give it a shot, right? But a lot of times these things stretch you a little bit. So, like, is the juice going to be worth the squeeze? Like, you know, so, and then how to select the right coach, and then specifically, you know, how to avoid wasting time and money, you know, on potentially dangerous strategies from a coach who actually doesn't know the business as well as you might. Austin, I know that you have in the past had coaching, I believe, with Buffini, and then maybe there was a period of time where you did not. And if I understand it correctly, you're getting coaching again. So I'd love to hear from you what your thoughts are on the utility of business coaching in particular.
Right. Yeah, it's so I use a coach through Buffini and Company. They are tailored towards real estate agents and brokers, and so it is a very specific type of coaching. I mean, it's a business coach, and I attribute a lot of my beginning success towards the coaching, and I can't point to one specific. I mean, the biggest thing that helped me in the beginning was mindset. You know, I'm coming into real estate 23, 24 years old, no connections, not knowing what I'm doing, and just lacking confidence. And he just called me on it right away in a healthy way, and just gave me some practical things to do to help me with mindset. Well, I started working on that, and you know, coincidentally, it was just like as I'm working on mindset, my sales are going up, and so I have nothing to blame but, you know, the things that he's given me to do that seem really kind of silly. And so then a couple years into it, business really grew, and I think maybe I think they had passed me off to another coach in the company, and we just didn't jive. Then my mom passed away, and I just didn't have the energy to do the work anymore. You know, what's the point of having a coach if it's not helping, if it's not changing you? So I bailed out of it then, and then COVID happened, and this is strictly from a business standpoint, and things were going well because through COVID, any turkey can fly through a hurricane, man. And that's literally what was happening is drinking from a fire hose. It didn't matter whether you could just say you're selling peanut butter and you were busy. I mean, it didn't matter what it was. It was just like, and that's kind of how it was. And then about a year and a half ago, when the industry started to change and things started to slow up and the Fed started raising the rates, and I kind of started looking around and seeing like, I was literally just bouncing from one fire to the next for the last 2-3 years. I have no sense of direction. I'm in some ways very successful. I've grown a lot, and my transaction count isn't down, but I don't know where I'm going. And so I just kind of went back to Buffini, and they set me up with another coach. And I don't like this guy, to be honest with you. I don't like him. I do, but he annoys me. And, you know, I've so many times just wanted to pull the plug on it because I'm like, I don't like him in the fact that he constantly is pushing on me. Like, constantly, like, hitting me in the ouch part and constantly, like, picking on me. In a loving, good way. If I would let my pride run the show, he would have been out the door 6 months ago. Like, there would have been no chance. But I decided to stick with it, and I mean, the numbers don't lie. Like, and I'm not bragging. I'm saying, like, coaching works. Like, and I'm still, like, you know, this a full year into it, but I'm ahead of where I ever was before. And so I can't deny that. So I have to do another year. But the guy kind of irks me. I mean, he really does. Like, we had a coaching session today, and he's just pushing on me because he's like, well, you don't really know how to celebrate. That's why you don't have vision for where you're going. I mean, I'm getting honest. This is what we talked about today. And I'm wanting to fight him, and I'm wanting to lip back and tell him he doesn't know what he's talking about, and like look at my success and just things like that. Like he just doesn't let me go, I guess. And so it's good. I hate it, but I need it. And so I guess that's why I keep paying the money every month, because I can't deny the results. I am growing, but there's a tension there, and I think the tension is where the growth happens.
How often do you meet, and for how long?
So we have, it'd be nice to have more, but we do 2 phone calls per month for half an hour. And there's all kinds of resources that come with that. There's group coaching that I can jump in on yet too, which I haven't, because honestly, to me, it seems silly, the things they do. But again, that's probably my pride. And so, if you want to find out what's behind something, you push on it. And that's what he's constantly doing with me, is he's pushing on me. Why do you think that? And why would you, let's highlight that and work on that for a minute. And I just want to be like, no. I want to like stop looking at me and let's move on. But every area where I've gotten coaching on, I have improved, including years ago, I was getting health coaching and I lost a bunch of weight. And so I can't deny that, but I really feel like in all my experience with coaching, a good coach should actually get under your skin a little bit.
So I could see twice a month for 30 minutes as a phone call. It's easy. It doesn't take that much time. Once a week for business coaching seems like it would just come around too fast, and maybe once a month isn't quite long enough. So I like that cadence. Do you think, though, over your entire experience with coaching, if you think about how much that you have paid for coaching over the last decade and a half, whatever it's been, that you have made that up? Do you think it's paid for itself?
Oh, yes. Oh, for sure.
You're confident?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, there's no doubt in my mind. Like, there's no doubt in my mind. Just tips and tricks. And I mean, if nothing else, okay, so like the confidence, there was a big change up in the industry, a lawsuit last year, and just working with a coach through that and helping me with my scripts and just different things like that. Just the confidence that it gives you to have someone in your corner, who cares about you and wants to see you succeed, just really, really does help. I have thought multiple times, even today, dude, this is stupid. Like, why are you the way that you are about my coach? But it's this odd thing of like, that's what keeps me coming back. It's because he's not letting me get away with it.
So you think he's effective? He's annoying, but he's effective?
He is. That's what I hate saying, but it's my pride. And that's really what it comes down to, is like, like to get spiritual, like, God resists the proud but gives grace to the humble. Grace comes to the humble. So if I humble myself and I allow somebody else to pry apart, to open the doors of my heart and my mind and my thought process and speak to it, there will be grace to change and to grow. And really, like, he truly does annoy me. And if I would let my pride run the show, he would have been out the door a long time ago. But that's why I keep with him. And it's a love-hate thing, man. But I can't deny the results. Okay. That's why I keep coming back to it. I can't.
Patrick, I'm curious what you think from your vantage point, sort of as a coach. Coaching is one of the things that you're doing now. Is there... Would you have any insight on the types of situations where coaching is a no-brainer? Absolutely do it. Pony up for it. And then maybe the types of situations where maybe it's not worth the time and the money, where maybe it's not going to be as effective. Would you have any insights on that?
Yeah. So I'm not in the business coaching space, so it's harder to tie a financial return back to the coaching that I do. And what's been interesting, too, to notice is I'm a relatively new coach, and at least new to offering my coaching services in a commercial way. Initially, I thought that men would seek me out for help with their addiction to porn or, other kinds of addiction maybe, or if there was patterns in their life that they needed help to get victory over, get free from. That's kind of where I thought it would be, but it turns out most of the guys come because of some other pain that's not that. It's usually maybe kind of adjacent to that, something in marriage, relationship with their kids, wanting to be a better dad. But a lot of it is just, becoming more of the man that they feel that there's something that they were created to be that they're not experiencing in their life, and they're desperate to see that come forward, and they're looking for help. So I think the line is, especially when there's not a financial return per se, it's like, well, if I can make this money back, 2x this money, then, it'll be worth it. I think it's a little different rubric for this kind of coaching. And it really comes down to, is the pain that you're experiencing sufficient to make you want to make the sacrifices necessary? And the sacrifice, I mean, of course, there's the financial sacrifice, but there's also the time commitment to doing the work. But much more difficult than either one of those is the part of it that Austin talked about, which is the sacrifice of ego, which is to say, recognize that, yes, I've been, not quite pointed in the right direction in this part of my life. And so I got to let that go and, build this new skill, habit, mindset, belief, whatever it is. But it does, when I talk to a new client, it's always because of pain. And the pain always points to some desire. It's a desire for something to be different than it is today. And, men show up with varying abilities to articulate that desire, varying senses of clarity about what that desire is. Sometimes it's just the pain of being disconnected. Pain, and that the pain of disconnect is great enough that it is worth it for many men to make that investment, not least of, which is the investment in being willing to take the time and sacrifice the ego, sacrifice what their view of the world, admitting that their view of the world is insufficient to guide them to where they want to go, and saying, I need someone to help me see this in a different way. And I think when the pain gets bad enough, that's when you go.
Yeah. Yeah. So, Austin, what would you think? So, I'm running Amish Co. We retail Amish made buildings. We get sales up. I make more money. I need to be making more money in this season of life with where my kids are at. I just do, and it needs to happen as quick as possible. I've obviously been in this industry in the past as a manufacturer that also did retail. I grew up in it, so I know it super well. But I'm not going to pretend that a coach would not have something to offer me. How would I know whether I should just do more of what I already know needs to be done, or to pony up and get a coach involved?
Right. I love what you're asking because it's hitting all these points. So sometimes it's not enough to know what to do. Sometimes it's someone to literally hold you accountable to what to do. And I feel like that's part of what the coach offers me. Come on, man, you know what to do.
Yeah.
You do.
I know, but the
why
part
don't you
of
do it?
having someone hold you accountable is the part that doesn't sound so fun.
No, it's not. No, I'm not coaching because it's fun. No, it's not. No, I'm not. I really mean that. I'm not coaching because it's fun. It's not. I want to fight him about every time we get on the call. And he doesn't know this. If he listens to the podcast, he'll know. But, and I have not had that before with another coach. He is sympathetic. There is times where, obviously, he's there to, hear my pain. But he's always like, okay, well, now let's move on from that. Pushing me to, hire an admin. Pushing me to delegate. I fought him on that for months and then finally caved in and did it. And I was like, part of me just did it because I wanted to stick it to the man and prove that he was wrong. Be like, there's not going to be enough for this girl to do. And, which seems petty, looking back. And I'm so glad I did. And I'm like, okay, he's right. But I knew he was right, but I didn't do it. It's not enough to know what to do. It's more having someone who's poking you and being like, well, why aren't you doing it? Let's talk about what's behind. Because there's like today, it felt like it was one big counseling session. It was like, what was I struggling with? Like something with, well, just not having vision. Like I don't have vision. And so we like get talking into it, and he's basically like telling me in this call that you don't know how to celebrate your wins. You don't have a good way of doing that. And that's why you don't have vision. And I'm like, bro, that is the stupidest thing I've ever heard. And, you know, thankfully, I've learned to shut up and remove myself from my pride and look in, because that's what I have to do every time. And I'm looking at it and I'm like, darn it, he's right. Like, I continue to work and work and work because it's filling a void of something. And like, because I'm like, given my goals, and he's like, well, you're the only one stopping you from doing that. And so it is, as far as like when to do it, I mean, I would say sooner rather than later. Look, you can always fire the guy. I mean, like, what's it going to hurt? You're going to be out that money. I mean, there's local businesses that I know of that you would know too, Kent, that like they're telling me that the same thing. Like they have a coach that they're working with. The one business does as a partnership, and he was like, the one guy was telling me, yeah, he's really on me about working on my stuff and like working on this. And they just don't, a good coach really doesn't let you go. Like they know your excuses, they pin you down, and they help you see through the layers of insecurity and pride that you have. And that's what makes a good coach, and that's what keeps me doing it. It's not actually because I
Yeah.
really enjoy it, but I enjoy the fruit of
Okay.
it. That's it.
How many of the local businesses do you think are being coached that you know?
Okay, 1, 2, 3. 3 that I can think of offhand right away. Like actually pay someone to do this for them. And I don't know, and they're all different degrees. One of them actually really wanted to do Buffini, but they said we only do real
interesting.
estate companies. And so, yeah, there's at least 3 of them. And I've noticed there's palpable change, like the way that I was just over at one of them on Friday. They have a fun Friday. Every Friday they knock off early, and I came over and provided the food because I wanted to do some FaceTime, get in front of, again, another thing my coach encouraged me to do. And just walking into the business, like you could tell that there's structure and order, and that there's a plan and there's a process, and like if there's more than just one person or even 3 different guys running the show. There's obviously structure and a cadence and a rhythm, and well, there's fruit. There's fruit. I guess that's what I would say. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah, thanks for indulging me on that. Patrick, I'll kick it back to you for any other thoughts you want to chime in with, and then you can take it away again.
Yeah, I'll wrap up that segment by tying it back to evolutionary biology. So back when we all lived more in tribal settings, or our forefathers, our ancestors lived in tribes, as those tribes emerged from, the whatever hinterland that they were wandering on, certain tribes made it and other tribes didn't. And all of the tribes that we came from, they all survived long enough to produce people that produced us eventually, right? So they must have, from an adaptive standpoint, they figured out something that the tribes that died out did not. One of the things that the tribes that survived long enough to produce modern civilization, one of the things that they adapted to was something like a medicine man or a shaman in their tribe. That the shamanic tradition, or the medicine man, that role in the tribe became pretty much universal in terms of tribes who succeeded, and tribes who succeeded long enough to produce offspring that turned into what we know as modern civilization. And one of the roles that the medicine man had was to pay attention to different patterns of reality than what most of the people in the tribe were were looking at. So you had your hunters, you had your gatherers, you had other leaders, you had nurturers, you had different roles that people filled in the tribe. But the medicine man or the shaman, one of the things that he would do, say, for example, from a hunting perspective, is he was very tuned into the rhythms of nature, and he would watch, let's just say, for example, the deer, and they were hunting a deer, and he would watch the deer in a different way than the hunters would watch the deer. He would watch the deer to try to understand the deer at a different level, and he would kind of try to map himself onto the reality of the deer. And it's like, okay, when the deer gets a glimpse of the hunter, he recoils in this way, he feints in this way, and then he compresses in this way. And over time, over generations, there was a pattern of wisdom about the natural world that emerged from people who were honed in on noticing those different patterns and making them explicit to the ones who were actually out in the field doing the work. And I think the coach or the mentor plays a similar role in today's society, in that there's people out there who are hunting and gathering and fulfilling the different roles that they have in business and relationships and different parts of society, that there's a role that they fill and they're focused on executing on that role. There's certain patterns that they're in. I think a coach's job is to notice certain things about the segment of reality that they specialize in, and notice certain patterns of reality that they can point out. They almost map themselves onto it in some way so that they can kind of, that's why, Austin's coach is able to kind of fairly deftly wield that scalpel and kind of get to the part that hurts, like right away, just like, carves in there very skillfully, because he's been paying attention to the patterns of reality in that space for a long enough time to have some expertise in doing so. So in some strange way, the coaching and mentoring community is almost an offshoot of the medicine man or shamanic tradition in a tribe, where they've mapped themselves onto that part of reality. And that's why you have coaches who are skilled in helping set up manufacturing workflows, and coaches who are skilled in setting up better relationships, and some in driving sales, different areas of success. But they map themselves onto that part of reality, and they get really keen about what the patterns are that produce flourishing in that segment. And then they can help you map your life onto that so that you can then come in harmony with those patterns and take advantage of them, and that your life begins to flourish in that dimension too. So when a coach is firing on all cylinders, that's what he's doing. He's playing the role of the medicine man in some strange way. Make sense?
Well, shit. That does make sense. I can see the reasoning in that.
All right. So there you go. All right. Well, we've been at it for a little while, guys. It's time to wrap up this episode. Why don't we keep it a little lighthearted instead of ending it on a note about evolutionary biology? Let's talk about movies just briefly. We're getting into the winter season here, and that's typically more when I get to see movies and all that. But I just wanted to take a quick round and see if you have any movies that you would like to suggest that people watch, or something that you've seen that has impacted you.
Yeah, I go. All right, so a recent movie that I watched, I think this one came out in 2015. Here's a little weave. I noticed this recently about myself in the last several months. For some reason, this just occurred to me is the first thing I'll say here is that I've liked more modern movies. I just prefer them. I always have. And just because it's the closer to your experience and it's new and modern and sexy or whatever, it's kind of, I just prefer that. Now, if there is a old movie, though, that's good enough to like rise above, I'm cool with that. I just tend to prefer, if it's 6 one way and half a dozen another, I'm going to want to see a more modern movie. And this is what I've noticed is, if I'm scrolling looking for a movie and that thing came out in 2012 or newer, it's almost like something changed in that period of time. Yeah, right? If it's 2001, 2002, of course, that's kind of a little older. Yes. 98, that can be kind of gnarly. 2006. But there's something about 2012. When I see a movie that is 2012 or newer, that to me, it all fits in the same category. Like, it doesn't really matter if a movie came out in 2018 or 2024 in terms of like the modern movie. It's kind of all the same. But for me, the demarcation line for some weird reason is 2012. But so the Man from U.N.C.L.E., I think this one came out in 2015, and I had seen it a while ago, and then I do this frequently where I see a movie or I see like a title for a movie and I conflate it with another movie. And I love when this happens where it's like I see this movie on Netflix or whatever and I keep passing over it because in my mind it is a certain thing. And then eventually I'm like, for some reason I just double check on it. And then I realize, oh no, this isn't the movie that I had in mind to begin with. And then you watch it and it's like, oh, that was awesome. And that's happened a couple times, in the last year or two where like I was overlooking a movie because I conflated it with another movie and it turns out it's a fantastic movie. I kind of did the same thing with The Man from U.N.C.L.E. I think I conflated it with, now I'm not going to remember, but another kind of spy movie that was okay. So I rewatched The Man from U.N.C.L.E. recently, I think with Marianne, and man, I loved it. It's a fantastic movie. But there's three that I want to say that are in terms of the keeping with what's happening in the world today, which is basically the Israelis kicking ass. There's three movies that I watched recently that I really, really enjoyed. Munich, Operation Finale, and then this third one is not a movie, it's a show on Netflix called The Spy. It's about Eli Cohen, who was a spy for Mossad back in the day, and he infiltrated Egypt, right? No. Yeah, I think Egypt. And anyhow, Munich and Operation Finale, they're both based on true stories, but they're just good movies. And then The Spy is a show on Netflix that really well done.
I do like a good spy movie. I'll have to check that out or that show. Austin, what you got?
So, little weave here too. I've been realizing that my favorite movies are actually heist movies. And I will do anything to find a good heist movie. I think it, and I've asked myself why, and I'm like, I think it's I love it when a plan comes together. Like, I love a plot that keeps me, that I think I have figured out, but then there's some hard left turn towards the end of the movie. I just, like, I love a good movie like that when I go and just, like, it gets my mind going. I don't know. But I watched Snowden recently. That was fascinating. Made me want to like shut all my electronics off or like put tape over the cameras and all that. But yeah, that was one of those movies. Just I was like, wow, can they really do that kind of a thing? So
that's with who's the actor in that, Austin? I can see his face. Yes.
Gordon.
Yeah. What's his name?
Starts with an L. Come on. Somebody Google this thing.
Gordon Levitt. Something like that, right?
That's it. Yeah. Gordon Levitt. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. That is. I haven't seen that movie in a long time, but so you liked it?
Yeah, it was great. Just kind of, again, really good plot. I mean, I love when someone outsmarts. What's that good prison movie? Shawshank Redemption. That's an old one. Have you seen that one, Ken?
Yeah, see, like that's an old one, but that's just a fantastic movie. That's a great movie.
That's what I mean. Yeah. There is some of those old ones
sure.
where I'm like, okay, that was actually really good. I didn't waste my time. Like, but there is, I agree with you 1,000%. 2012. There's something about that line in the sand where it's like they're just better after 2012. Don't ask me why. Like in my mind, I 100% agree.
Hey Patrick, before we go, can we? No, you go. So I interrupted you. I was going to change the subject.
Well, I was going to mention. No, that's fine. I was going to mention. I saw a movie called Calvary. Fairly recent movie, 23, 24-ish. But Brendan Gleeson plays an Irish Catholic priest, and it's dark as hell, funny as hell, redemptive and loving and full of forgiveness, but also, did I mention dark and funny? It's great.
Okay, so, Calvary.
Calvary, yes. So check that out.
Hey, I was just going to say,
but back to
before
you,
we
Ken.
shut this off, we just need to get on record. Who do we think is going to win tomorrow?
Ooh, yeah. I don't think you can. I actually don't think it's going to be quite as close as people predict. That's
Okay.
my prediction.
So you're predicting Trump?
Yeah, Trump's going to win. I think I'm just pulling up the election betting markets right now. My gut is that the betting market is probably the best way to predict these things because when people are putting their money, polls are pretty iffy, right? I mean, polls, I don't even know
Agreed.
people who's ever talked to a pollster? So we don't know who they're talking to. We don't know what they're asking them. There's all kinds of ways to mess those polls up. So they're of limited utility to me. But if you look on Kalshi.com, Kalshi, Kalshi.com, they have a betting poll for you can bet, or you can buy options for Donald Trump winning or Kamala Harris. And so when people bet with their money, they're saying Trump will win 57% to Kamala 43%. And that spread has been widening throughout the day. I've been watching that today. 2 days ago, it was very close. It was, something like 49-51 Trump. And since then, it's widened to 57-43 Trump. That's a big enough differential, and there's enough money behind that it looks like there's 227 million some odd dollars bet on that set of contracts. So I mean, when people vote with their dollars, that to me is one of the most dependable ways to predict. And so I'm predicting a pretty solid Trump victory. I think 4 out of 5 swing states are going to go Trump probably.
Yeah, the poll thing is interesting because I genuinely just do not understand. I've never heard of anyone being called by a pollster, and there is a crap ton of polls. I mean, and they do it frequently. And so it just seems like odd to me that there's so many polls happening so often in the last 6 months even. How have I not heard of anyone who's heard of someone who has answered the phone for a pollster? But I digress. But yeah, I'm assuming Trump's going to win. How about you, Austin?
I guess I don't agree. In my mind, I don't know why. Maybe it's influence. It's a pretty petty thing, but I just see all these Kamala signs everywhere around here.
You do.
Yeah, we do. And so again, but the whole thing of polls is, what you heard Trump say on the Rogan podcast, that was really interesting. Like, if they cook the polls, because if somebody says that, Kamala's going to win by a huge margin, if the polls say that, people won't even get out and vote.
Yep.
That was mind-blowing to me. I was like, man, so I guess I'm the odd man out here. But
look, you got that perspective. The only thing is we already knew New York was going to go all blue with their electoral college vote. So, every state just gets to, it is interesting how that works, but no, you might be right. I will say I'm not shocked. I would not be shocked either way. But if I had to place a bet for something that's going to come out on Thursday, who knows? We might not even know, when this comes out, who definitely won. But my guess would be Trump's probably going to win. But we shall see.
Yeah, that's my guess too. But we'll see. All right, cool. Kent, where do you want people to connect with you online and stay in touch with you?
At Kent Lapp on X.
At Kent Lapp on X. Austin, where do you want people to connect with you?
I'm actually on Facebook these days, so Austin Lapp.
Austin Lapp on Facebook. Choose from the best looking one amongst the dozen or so. And you can follow me on Instagram at goodking.life. That's goodking.life. Goodking.life on the web too, but Instagram is where I spend most of my time. So good deal, gentlemen. It's been a pleasure. I hope you guys get some adventure in your life this week, and I hope your eyes are open to the magnitude of the adventure of your life that you're being called into. And I hope that's true for those listening. please go to mettleandforge.com, the show's website, METTLE, mettleandforge.com. You can submit a comment or a suggestion, a topic if you'd like for us to cover. Drop it in the form on the website, mettleandforge.com. Thank you for being here. We look forward to the next time we can be together. I hope you guys have a great rest of your week.
See you guys.